Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mark Zimmer. I'm the spokesman at AIT, spokesperson. We're very pleased to have you with us. I know it's the middle of a work day, the middle of a school day, and we're very honored to have you all here. I'd like to acknowledge our friends from the media who have joined us. Also some students, especially the Foreign Students Club. We're very pleased to have you all here. Welcome, and other friends of AIT and attendees, thank you. I'd like to do two pieces of housekeeping before we get too far along. Today's event is on the record by virtue of not only our media friends being here, but also that the event is being live streamed. You all may have seen the link on the poster. We're very pleased with that, especially as we're here with a social media expert. So our remarks are on the record. With that said, I would emphasize that our panelists, with the exception of Mr. Bookbinder and myself as moderator, our panelists are speaking for themselves, not for the U.S. government, although this event is sponsored by AIT. So please bear that in mind as they speak, and of course we expect them to speak freely, but only Mr. Bookbinder and I speak for AIT. I'd like to briefly let you know why our guest is here from Wisconsin. This is a speaker program put on by the Department of State. We at AIT are very lucky to welcome approximately one per year, a speaker who can come out and work with our Taiwan friends on subjects that are of policy priority to AIT as we conduct the U.S.-Taiwan relationship. This year, in consultation with everybody from me to the director, we decided to focus on media, and we have, of course, a journalism professor with us to work with our Taiwan friends for a week on the things that you're going to hear about today. An AIT policy priority is promotion of the very healthy, very vibrant democracy that we see in Taiwan. A major part of that is the free and vibrant press that we enjoy in Taiwan. So again, that's the setup of this program and why Dr. Culver has come from the U.S. to be with us this week. I'll tell you, today is the capstone or the culminating event of her visit. She's been here this is her fourth day working. We have spent time with, again, friends from the media. We've spent time with journalism students. We've had several other good meetings with other Taiwan friends. So today, again, she comes with some perspective and some experience, although it's only 4 days, and having had lots of very healthy, very exciting interchange with our friends, again, who we met with in Taiwan. So that's again the setup of the program and why Dr. Culver is here. Today's panel is entitled, as you know, Journalism in the Digital Age, Trends, Tools, and Technologies. I'll do a full introduction of Dr. Culver in a moment, but she is a social media expert, and our panelists are also involved in different ways in the media and social media. The Taiwan context, of course, is, as I referenced earlier, one of an extremely healthy democracy, but also a young democracy and a young free press, and one that is continuing to develop. So today, again, I hope to have a very interactive discussion about that democracy and the free press. I'd like to introduce our speakers now, if I may please. First, we'd like to welcome, again, Dr. Culver. Kathleen Culver is an assistant professor at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. She's at the School of Journalism and Mass Communication. In addition, she's the associate director of the Center for Journalism Ethics. She's been teaching for approximately 15 years. She also serves as the visiting faculty for the Poynter Institute of Media Studies and an education curator for PBS Media Shift, where she helps advance innovation in journalism curricula and courses. Her specialties include social media, visual communication, branding, and media ethics. So we're very pleased to welcome Dr. Culver. Please join me in welcoming her. We're also very pleased to welcome Deborah Mao. Deborah is the Taipei Bureau Chief of Bloomberg News, Bloomberg LP. She oversees coverage of political, economics, and market news in Taiwan. She has experience both in Hong Kong and Washington, D.C., in addition to Taiwan. She's also one of two Harvard University graduates on our panel today. Please join me in welcoming Deborah. On the far end, we're very pleased to welcome Mr. Guo Chong-lun. Mr. Guo is a veteran journalist known for in-depth stories and commentaries in international news, particularly U.S.-Taiwan relations. He oversees United Daily News's coverage of international and cross-strait news on a daily basis. He's been with UDN since 2010 and has also worked with China Times for 19 years prior to that. Mr. Guo graduated from National Taiwan University with a master's in political science and has also studied in the PhD program at the Political Science Department of the University of Chicago. We're very grateful for him joining us today. Thank you. Finally, closest to this side is Mr. Joseph Bookbinder. Joe Bookbinder is the chief of the public diplomacy section at the American Institute in Taiwan. He arrived in Taiwan on August 1st of 2013. He's been in the Foreign Service for over 20 years. He's also served in India, China, both in Chengdu and Beijing, as well as Hong Kong. He's also had three domestic assignments, 3 assignments in Washington, D.C. As I noted, he's a graduate of Harvard University. He also speaks Chinese and French. Please welcome me in joining Joe. I would like today's session to be very interactive. You're aware that we have colleagues in the booth doing simultaneous translation. If you don't have a headset, please feel free to get one. With the simultaneous translation, it's important that when you're speaking, you use a microphone. So please wait for a microphone to come to you when you have a question. I'd like to minimize the amount I speak after this brief introduction. We would like to have a healthy exchange as we've had all week. Dr. Culver has expressed to me multiple times that the audience has been dynamic and engaged and clearly focused on this topic in the same way that we at AIT are. So please, again, feel free to ask questions, make this interactive and lively. As I noted, we have a live stream happening. We'll receive questions over the live stream as well. I'd like to conclude my introduction by thanking the people who helped make this happen. They're around the room. They've done the hard work here. We have some interns from local universities who are doing some work at AIT, and we're very proud to have them with us. Our staff here has done a ton of work. We have the translators in the booth. We also have colleagues in Washington, D.C. who are up right now at 2:30 in the morning to make sure we can live stream this. We're very grateful to them as well. With that said, I would like to start the panel by asking Dr. Culver to offer a couple of reflections or a summary of the things she's been saying on the island this week in terms of what the trends are in media, what's happening in the U.S. media as well as internationally. And I think those will be very informative insights to start our panel.
Thank you, Mark. I wanted to start out by thanking all of you. Oh, I'm learning already. I wanted to start out by thanking all of you for being here, and also, excuse me, and also to note that many people call the University of Wisconsin-Madison the Harvard of the Midwest. Had to do it. Yes.
Especially people at universities.
So I'm delighted to be here with some very distinguished colleagues to talk about what I think are critical issues for all of us to tackle. It has been a delightful week. I've felt welcomed at every single stop. I've been worked very hard, but that's good because it prevents me from having any time to get homesick. So I'm delighted to be here. And I think some of the trends that I'd like to highlight as an entry point into this discussion are the pressures that many of us feel in the U.S., and I've seen and spoken with people here in Taiwan who feel the pressures of particularly time and competition. Those are two themes that I think are really critical for us to examine. Mark highlighted the integral role that a free press plays in a vibrant democracy, but I'm going to edit him because I like to do that. I'm an editor and a teacher, so I will insert that I think a vibrant democracy depends not only on a free press, but on a free and responsible press. And to the extent that media seem freewheeling or out of control, sometimes that can present many, many problems within a culture like mine and a culture like yours. So by time and competition, I guess I would start out first with time and say that the speed with which we communicate now is unprecedented in human history. We have tools at our disposal through which anyone can become a publisher, regardless of the responsibility they feel to do things right, regardless of their level of integrity, and they can get that communication out in an instant. And there's a great old Winston Churchill quote that a lie can get halfway around the world before the truth has a chance to get its pants on. That's truer than ever now. 140 characters of misinformation can be picked up very quickly and shared, and it can have a multiplier effect that's very, very difficult for societies to deal with. So that kind of speed, I'm sure, is something that we will discuss quite a bit up here on the panel. And then competition. So, as you know, I would never pretend to be an expert in Taiwan media. I've spent a couple of months studying and talking to people and thinking about the issues that you face here. And then I've had 5 days to observe. And I would say a word that strikes me as freewheeling. A lot of competition, a lot of people trying to get the audience eyeballs and clicks, and that presents some problems sometimes. It can lead to pack journalism, where many people are covering the same thing, trying to meet audience demand. It can lead to shallow coverage. We're focused only on breaking news at the expense of in-depth investigations. And yet, I also see so much to feel positive about. You know, some of the journalism students that I've had conversations with feel this tremendous sense of obligation and responsibility, and their integrity was really quite impressive to me. So I'll just say those as two trends that I think are worth watching and talking about.
Thank you for the start to the discussion. I think we'll start with a question from our online audience. They've had a chance to submit some questions already, and I would maybe ask Dr. Culver to start, and we'll ask other panelists to join in. The question is this: do you believe the tools we use for online communication, such as Facebook, Twitter, Skype, or here in Taiwan, the tool Line, bring humanity closer or drive us further apart through indifference? And does the concept of convenience have its consequences?
Well, I would say yes. So it cuts both ways. Sometimes these tools can be absolutely remarkable for drawing us together. You saw with the Arab Spring, tools like Twitter and Facebook and direct communication via WeChat or services like Line, drawing people of common purpose together in protest. And that was a tremendously important organizing tool. Yet there are some people who argue that we are what they call alone together, that we use these tools to isolate ourselves from direct human contact, direct interaction. And you know, as a mother of teenagers, sometimes a text message is the best I can get out of them. I appreciate that point, the point that we can be in isolation or alone together. I, in my research, spent a lot of time dealing with new technologies, everything from a smartphone to a drone. And one of the things that I like to always emphasize about those technologies is that they're not determinative. It's not the technology that equals the use. It's we as human beings who bring our own agency, our own sense of responsibility to the tool, and that's what's important. It's not the technology, it's how we choose as humans to use it.
Mr. Guo, I wonder if you have anything to add in the Taiwan context?
First of all, from the second question, did we pay a price for using this kind of instant, like Facebook or Line? I think we do, because nowadays the journalists, they are working around the clock. Every reporter is demanded to send out instant, we call it the real-time news. That every media now in Taiwan, or the major one, they have launched the service like that. It's either go through APP or Facebook, that if you want the news, you can get it anytime you like. But The thing is, what's the context of this news? There's not enough space to do the analysis. There's not enough time for people to hear about it in the whole context. So I think a lot of time it's lead to a lot of misunderstanding, or you don't get the whole picture of the story. That's one thing. We also noticed that there's a very proliferation on using the social network, but sometimes you were getting the news forward by your friends or the like-minded, that you will not get something that is contradictory of what you already believe or different political opinion. So during the process, of course, you have some friends who have different political opinion, but in Taiwan case, in the several incident happened, people befriend their friend, meaning that if you don't agree with me, I don't want to see you in my social network. That means the end of the different kind of political opinion. In that way, you are not contributing a discussion or dialogue, rather you are getting the message from the like-minded. I think that's the danger of it.
Dr. Culver, you've talked a lot this week to our audiences about echo chambers. I wonder if you could elaborate on that for a second, please.
Yes, that's an absolutely critical point. I would say we worry a lot about whether we have a culture of information or a culture of affirmation. And the research actually is mixed. We do certainly have that echo chamber effect, and it seems to be more prevalent the younger people are. But our social networks, when we take all of them into account, so Facebook plus Twitter plus LinkedIn, are more diverse than some of us initially suspected. So there's a little less echo than I worried about. But we do see people increasingly, and the more educated and the more ideologically driven they are, we see them succumbing to what we call motivated reasoning, looking at what would otherwise be seen as balanced news coverage, and their reasoning is so bent that they bring to bear all of that ideology, and they misinterpret the story. They don't see the same information. You can have two partisans, for instance, read the identical news story, and both of them, if they are toward the polls, and if they're highly educated, both of them will see it as hostile to their view, the identical story. It's called the hostile media effect. And it's a very difficult thing for communicators to have to wrestle with, how we frame stories to actually educate a public as opposed to just affirm their viewpoints.
Thank you for that. I'm going to call on Joe next, if I may, and that's in the context of a person who does outreach for the U.S. government, as I do. I think we find that we're a little bit restricted, maybe the wrong word, but it takes us a little bit longer to respond to situations. We have to coordinate things. We can't do an instantaneous communication oftentimes to respond to a situation, and that leaves us behind. I wonder if there are perspectives from somebody who's had 2 decades of experience communicating for the U.S. government.
Sure. I mean, when you're in the government, when you're a Foreign Service officer, you're never speaking really for yourself in public. You have to recognize when we join the Foreign Service, then we're serving the President, we're serving the United States, so that I might have a feeling on my own about foreign policy. I'm free to discuss that privately with my friends or family. But in public, we always have to be willing to express the point of view of the U.S. government. So for some people, that can be a real challenge. Fortunately, I have found that, generally speaking, the U.S. government takes ethical positions. I find generally I'm in agreement with what's going on. But what it also means is you have to very carefully analyze a situation before responding. And it's very important not to take criticism personally. So, you have to look at things from a broader perspective. And you have to, when you're representing or speaking on behalf of the U.S. government, Sometimes you need to be a little bit more patient. You cannot, excuse me, you cannot give a snap response, as Mark explained. And so it may mean that you have to check back with Washington, and we go through a clearance process. So what we do is we always aim to tell the truth, okay? But we may not be able to express everything we know about a situation, and it may not be in our interest to express everything we know. So we always try to respond honestly and accurately to questions that we receive. But at the same time, sometimes if you respond too completely, you could put a person, an individual, or a situation at risk. So you bear a lot of responsibility. It's not the same as sometimes an individual person will just express their opinion. We can't do that because there are more ramifications to what we say, how we say it. So we need to be a little bit more careful and a little bit more responsible. It can be frustrating, but also if you keep in mind that you're going to be honest and accurate and do the best job you can, usually turns out okay.
Thank you for that. I'd like to remind you all that I invite questions or reactions. Please just raise your hand. We'll get you a microphone. We've got colleagues moving around the room. If there's nobody having thoughts on that one, I'll move along. The second question, oh, pardon me, please, thank you.
My name is Caleb Michael Young. I speak for a new budding news team called Report for Taiwan. We have a question regarding a previous panelist, Mr. Guo. You were talking about the credibility of Facebook and Line, if I do remember correctly. So that's also a part of our question, is whether we should continue launching our news updates on Facebook or online, because with the digital age, anyone could be a journalist in some ways. However, with that comes with the price of credibility. And so we're kind of in the process of thinking whether we should switch platforms. So that would be my question about whether we should continue placing our stuff on Facebook, which comprises 92% usage rate in Taiwan, or should we switch to, let's say, an independent website?
Please, Mr. Guo.
I think that's something a lot of news media now in Taiwan is considering. Starting from, I think this year, that Next Media had its instant news service, and then every other media follow that. It means that sometimes the reporter in the field have to do extra work or even double amount of work in order to cope this kind of demands. But from a newspaper or a media organization that they believe that the digital is the future. That's the rumor that the Next Media is going to abolish all the printed form of the news, like the weekly or the newspaper, and turn it all into a digital service. Although no one can be sure they can get their money back because there's no mature business model so far. So I believe that we are seeing that this trend will continue, but until one day that the boss find out that it cannot match the cost that it paid, and then without any benefit that is coming out from here. So that's my feeling so far.
So one thing that I would recommend that you take a look at is the New York Times Innovation Report. If you just Google for those words, it's a really important summary of meeting audiences in the digital age. My shorthand of that report would say, why in the world would you ever leave a platform where 92% of your fellow citizens are? If they are on Facebook, you are on Facebook. And there's nothing specifically about Facebook as a platform that would damage your credibility. It's, again, no technological determinism. It is your actions, what you put on Facebook, that drives credibility. People trust news sources not because of where they are, but because of what they do. And they distrust them because of not where they are, but what they do. I think line is very important. The younger you are, the more important it is. Part of what I'll use the word preach when I'm talking about digital media, is that please everybody, let's not chase all the 18-year-olds because they have money to spend and because they're in all these sexy online places. People like my 88-year-old father matter. They are citizens that we still need to meet. And any news organization that stops circulating a print product automatically puts at risk the information needs of senior citizens, and also poorer populations, vulnerable populations, all the people that journalism is supposed to represent. So that innovation report gives you a good idea or a good insight into where to meet audiences with different messages. And the more places you can meet them, the better.
I'm here representing Bloomberg News, which is probably one of the world's biggest multi-platform news services out there today. I don't know if you guys are aware, but Bloomberg started out as a wire service only for the financial markets. And now we have everything from magazines, TV channels to, we also have Twitter, we also have a Facebook presence, so we're kind of everywhere these days, and that's exactly what Dr. Culver said, and it's not about where your news is seen. I think you probably want to be everywhere you think you have an audience, but it's about the content and how you derive the content.
Yeah. Just briefly, I would note, when I go to a restaurant and I look at the menu, I like to have more than one item to choose from on the menu, okay? And sort of a bigger menu where you have print media, you've got radio, television, social media, they meet different needs. When I'm traveling on the run, I'd like to get just some headlines, just a quick news. But on the weekend, when I'm at home, I like nothing better than to take my time, go through the New York Times or here international New York Times and get the in-depth stories. For me, that's the key. I think all of those are critical, but whatever you're doing, it is your credibility that counts. If you put out some kind of story, sensationalistic story, you can get a lot of attention, but if the story is not true, you may only get the attention one time. Then after that, the audience will drop off. So that's why it's so essential. Speed, I understand speed. You're competing with everybody else. But I think it is so essential to take the time to fact check, to get the story right. If it takes a little bit longer, I think that's worth it. Because in the long run, that's who people are going to look to. If you're known as the first one to get the story, but it's not right, it doesn't do you any good. So that's why I say the publications that we all trust the most are the ones that time and again get the story right. So that's where I would place my emphasis. Thank you.
I just want to echo Joe, and there's a saying in the United States, again, I don't speak for the U.S. government, so there's a saying in the United States that a man who will surrender his liberty for his security will end up with neither. And I like to say that a journalist who will surrender his integrity to chase an audience will end up with neither. The audience is very wise. Citizens, our fellow citizens are very wise. They know what to trust and to not trust, and you will lose them if you are emphasizing speed at the expense of accuracy and context.
Thank you all. I think we'll take a question from the online audience. Or we'll take one in person, please. Thank you. Maybe you could, if you have a preferred panelist to start the answering, please say so.
Sure. Question for Mr. Goh and the panel in general. I'm Richard. I'm a student at Goli Jinda. And I was just wondering, when you were talking about the amount of platforms journalists work from now, do you think Taiwan and perhaps the rest of the panel, the world, is at risk of losing quality journalism over quantity with everything that's coming out?
I understand that last year there's several websites created. They want to provide in-depth analysis, those quality journalism you apply, like Wind Media is one of them. But the thing is, I think they are running into trouble because what people nowadays is information, a lot of information. And there's very limited patience of reading something that is, you have to scroll down. So everything have to be in one page. That's very, I mean, it's very frightening to see this thing happening. And for the employer of the journalists, they tend to rotate them very fast and try to hire with a lesser salary instead of very high price of salary. So that means you will sacrifice seniority, you will sacrifice some of the experience that is coming out from all the days of reporting. So I'm very worried about what will happen in the future for good quality journalism in Taiwan. But the thing is, maybe there's, in the end, that the average working career for any of the journalism will be like 5 years, not even up to 10 years. So that would be a very sad thing to happen.
From the point of view of a wire service, quality and quantity are not mutually, like, they don't cancel each other out at all. We put out something like 5,000 stories a day globally, everything from short bullet point style, basically bulletins on what's happening right now, to long form investigative pieces. It just depends on what the subject matter is. Obviously, organizations that are more resource constrained will have to probably make some calls on what they devote their resources to, whether you're going to go and chase the breaking headlines or if you're going to take a step back and do the long form investigative pieces that will take a lot more time and basically time that you're not putting out news that perhaps your audience is like hungry for, to do the longer, more in-depth investigations.
So I'm going to give you a little pessimism and then a little optimism. I'm going to start with the downside first, and that is that my principal worry is that information overload will be especially taxing on the audience. I worry about it less in terms of journalists being able to produce, because we've really met the increased production requirements, even though the ranks of journalists have been shrinking. In the United States, we're down about 40,000 jobs over a decade. Yet there are lots of independent journalists who have come into the mix. But with that glut of information online, how people sort through it and figure out how they separate the wheat from the chaff, I'll use that idiom, that's my question mark, is that will people be able to distinguish responsible journalism in the public interest from all the other junk that's out there? Having said that, I will say I am just incredibly optimistic about the level of journalism that's being practiced worldwide right now. If you went and looked at the latest round of Pulitzer Prizes in the United States, and you stacked it up against the journalism that won that big national prize 40, 50 years ago, there's absolutely no comparison. It is better sourced, better analyzed on tougher issues. We're taking it to the government, which again I don't work for, every single day. I mean, look at the NSA surveillance story in the United States, and you will see media organizations that in an unprecedented way are challenging government, in the public interest. Some of the investigations that come out of Bloomberg, out of Reuters, out of even little upstart investigative nonprofit journalism centers. There's one that's across the hall from me in my building, and they're doing reporting on the mining industry in Wisconsin that is absolutely critical to understanding how our natural resources will work in the state for the next century. So the level of journalism is incredibly impressive. How we get audiences to it and to appreciate it, that's the question mark.
Any questions in the audience here? All right, we'll move to, pardon me, go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My question is about quality again, but this time I want to point about the yellow journalism that, as you were talking about before, right now we are having like young people getting more interested in news because of how they present the news now, the new formats that they have. However, for example, in the New York Times, we're going to have right now so many information that before it might be not allowed to have it, and that's because of the young people that it's reading it now. But how you think that could affect how the journalist is made right now in the world?
So do you mean how journalists are educated? How journalists are trained?
Yeah, like the ethics that are put on there.
The ethics. So absolutely, when new players come into any market, whether it's journalism or producing candy bars. So when you have startups, new players, there's always a question about whether they understand the kinds of ethics and responsibilities that we've really argued about and contested over half a century. In the early 1900s in the U.S., media ethics didn't exist. There's a rise, there's a history to it. And I think part of what we have to do is have public conversations exactly like this, engage people in understanding what media ethics means and how it's practiced. I'll give you an example from my experience. I have a colleague who runs a website that serves as a platform for citizen journalists, people who want to cover very micro-level news, the thing that affects not just our school district, but their particular school. And he goes out into the community and does trainings. He talks about things like objectivity, responsibility, accuracy, context, minimizing harm. He takes those media ethics messages out to the people who are newly reporting, who maybe have never been through journalism school, or who haven't, they're not in a newsroom having these conversations. At Bloomberg, those conversations happen every day. How do you protect a source? Do we provide confidentiality? Are we going to agree to turn over information when a subpoena is presented to us? That happens all the time for Deborah. For the little person covering the school board, that doesn't really happen. So I think there's a responsibility for news organizations to share those questions of ethics and to talk about them publicly and involve more people in that contest about what we're going to do and what responsible actually means.
I'd like to add that it's everyone's dream to have a quality journalism while still making money. I think if there's more and more news and media like Economist or Financial Times, they are doing very well while they maintain their quality of journalism. That would be an encouraging sign. But the thing is, for the Economist or the Financial Times, they are capturing the top 1% of the readership that all around the world. So the thing is, maybe they can exist in that form, but there's no second Economist magazine or the second Financial Times like that. That's the sad thing about it.
I would say, as a U.S. government official, quality journal, and I do speak for the U.S. government, so someone has to.
I don't.
Someone has to. As a U.S. government official, quality journalism means a lot to me. okay? Because Mark and I, we both get interviewed, and 23 years in the government, I often get interviewed. When someone is interviewing me, I hope that they have a tape recorder. I always bring one to try to protect myself. If they don't have a tape recorder, I hope they have a notepad. Okay? If they don't have a tape recorder and don't have a notepad and they're asking me questions, I get a little bit concerned because, I hope their memory is a lot better than mine. But I always ask them afterwards, could you repeat that back to me after I give an answer? Often, what I hear back is not what I said. So then I repeat it again. Okay, I repeat it again. And in this way, you try to make sure that what you're saying is what gets reported. Sometimes still, it gets, the journalists get it wrong. In that case, what I found, and this happens all over the world, in Taiwan, usually what we've said, it makes it into the paper intact, accurately. Sometimes not. When it's not, then I would get in touch with the journalist or an editor and ask them, could they print a correction or a retraction? And generally, they are willing to, if you can show, that they got it wrong. So that's okay. I mean, it's not great, but it's best to get it right the first time. But if papers, or if journalists are willing to come out with corrections, retractions, then that increases my confidence in them. And I would be willing to talk to them again next time. I don't think that brings down their credibility. When you print a correction, it shows that you care about the quality of the work that you're doing. New York Times has got a pretty good reputation. Washington Post also, other publications. Yet almost every day, and certainly online every day, when you look, they have corrections. They work to get it right. So I would say, that's another important factor, when we're considering this. And it builds confidence. It doesn't weaken confidence in the media. Thank you.
I would say I'm going to go back home and tell my students that if they show up to an interview with neither a recorder nor a notebook, they flunk.
Just to tag on to that, I had a friend of mine recently who pretty much G-chatted me and said, and he's a news analyst, basically covering issues related to Russia. And what he does is he basically gives his opinion on various news that happened that week. And he said, I'm thinking about becoming a journalist. And I'm like, oh, really? Okay. So how about going to this major publication and maybe starting as an intern? And he was super shocked that I had suggested that he should have to start at the bottom levels of his new journalism career. And I think that is because of the fact that in this day and age, everybody thinks that they can be a journalist. You watch CNN and you have these eye reports. You have people out there with their mobile phone taking footage of anything that's happening that's worthy of attention. And so people forget that there are standards and there are journalism schools, and people need to learn things like proper attribution and how to tell if somebody is credible and what the most credible source of information is. We have conversations in our newsroom every day when something comes through. Our wire is constantly ticking because we have all sources, not just Bloomberg, but like even Apple Daily and United Daily News, every possible source that you can think of to monitor in Taiwan. And something comes across, we think it's news, we think, wow, that's really shocking and surprising. So what are do we immediately put that out on the Bloomberg Newswire? The answer is no. Because there are many questions that you need to ask about any given piece of information before you can act on it. Who said it? Where did they say it? In what context did they say it? Did the reporter ask them a question, or did they call a press conference wanting to talk about this issue? It makes a huge difference, right? So I think as consumers, maybe that's a part of it is the consumer being able to distinguish the difference between something that's just a shocking rumor and something that is a completely substantiated piece of information. one thing that you can always look for in news reports is how transparent is that news organization about where they're getting this information. If you know exactly who said it, when, in what context, then you know that's credible. But if you just get the headline, nothing else, how do they know what they know? If you have no idea how to answer that, then maybe you should question it.
Totally agree with Joe and Deborah had said, but sometimes we journalists have to work in a very difficult condition, meaning that it's not everyone friendly, as Joe was said, that you can quote me and every word can be on records. Sometimes they like to off the record. Sometimes they just want to release something and then push for their own political gains. And you have to wait on that, whether I should report on this news or not. Because sometimes both the interests of the journalism and the one who do the interview is converged together. That it's a breaking story. You have someone that you have faith on, willing to talk something, but only on background. Whether you want to put that story out or not will be a very judgment thing to do. Always, I think Deborah is also right that we always have to find a second source to verify the story. That's very important because a lot of time journalists will be tricked into something that you regret for a long time. Right?
There's a political operative in the United States who, I think I'm on, yep. Who very famously once said, you journalists, you think you operate, or you journalists, you try to operate in a fact-based world. People like me know no such thing exists. In his mind, there's only a spin-based world. He was creating reality. And, you know, we can kind of laugh at it, but that is one of the scariest things I have ever heard. A person suggesting that there is no reality. There is only his invention of it for his own political gain. That's astounding. And that's something that a free press really must fight against. You know, there are plenty of people who say, I want to go on background, I want to go off the record, because they want to be able to spin and manipulate without consequence. And those people need to be resisted. They absolutely need to be resisted because we owe a duty to the public to prove that there is a fact-based world. It is not just about ideology and spin. There are rights and wrongs, there are goods and bads, there are plenty of shades of gray in between. You know, it is not all good and bad. I don't want to give that impression. But there are truths, and they're worth defending.
All right, we're going to move to a related question from our online audience, and maybe I'll ask Deborah to start as a, pardon me. Oh.
Hi everyone, my name is Wen Chen, for assistant professor in the National Defense University, of course, Department of Journalism. As a journalist educator, I am so worried about the quality of the news because from the freshman to sophomore, junior to senior, even the graduate student stage, I told my student every ethical, like they should protect the source and they should balance the coverage. And I can give you an example. I had a student, she graduated from my grade school and into a major coverage, news coverage in Taiwan. One day I saw in the newspaper she made a totally uncreditably biased position on the political news. And I made a phone call to ask why. And she just told me, Professor Fu, you pay me, you gave me scholarship when I was your student, but right now, my boss pay me salary. So I need to think about the opinion of my chief editor. I need to think about the position of my boss. So this is the first time I feel so truly about the name, the word so-called newsroom socialization. So honestly, to be journalist educator, I cannot be so optimistic on the quality of the news in Taiwan, especially.
So hello again, Professor, who spent some time in the state just below me, Illinois, in the great American Midwest. We're still the Harvard of the Midwest. So I absolutely agree. And one of the things that has come up in all of my visits this week with students is a very difficult question about what happens when I have my own integrity, but it differs from that. My goals differ from those of my employer. And you're right. It is not a rosy picture. There are constraints, institutional constraints, that individual journalists operate under, and it makes responsible journalism very difficult. So when we talk about media ethics, we do talk about individual level or virtue ethics, each of us trying to become our best human self. But we also talk about professional and institutional ethics and what the responsibility of that news organization is. I would say that I feel for that former student of yours, and that she exists within a structure that she is told to callously relay an opinion rather than to try to relay objective fact within the correct context. There are some excellent news organizations that take that institutional set of ethics very, very seriously. I would actually point to Bloomberg, not to suck up to my fellow panelists, but I would point to Bloomberg and the Associated Press and Reuters as places that take very seriously the institutional responsibility to a vibrant democracy. That's not the case everywhere, and so I understand your concern about journalism overall. In the United States, if you got me rolling on the institutional ethics of MSNBC and Fox News, who so callously manipulate the truth for their own ideological affirmation, well, that would be a long conversation indeed.
So let's back to the fundamental question of journalism. So does journalism is a institutional job or occupational job, right? It's so different. Like institutional, we need to concern about the ethical. We need to concern about does they have any universal ethic principle. But for occupation, it's just for salary, right? Just for monetary compensation. So honestly, I try to educate my every student to treat the journalist, to be a journalist as a institutional job, right?
I wouldn't just call it an institutional job. I would call it, for the very best people who do it, it's a calling. It is a matter of public service. They believe in what they are doing and the contribution of what they're doing to democracy. That is not what everybody feels. For some people, it's a paycheck. Tell me what to do, I'll do it and go home and buy myself a boat if I get a high enough paycheck, which doesn't happen very much in journalism, Deborah would say, I'm sure. But for the people who do it well and who truly believe in it, it's a calling. And I couldn't believe that. I couldn't believe that more seriously.
And I'd add that a good institutional structure, it trickles down to the occupational, right? If you have ethics for your employees saying, here are our correction rules. If you get something wrong, these are our policies, and you must report it, and you must have integrity about it and be honest, then that becomes the occupational responsibility of the journalist.
What I would say is, just last week I was back in Washington and for a conference on public affairs officers, public diplomacy, what we do. And I sat in on a training session that our State Department spokesperson gave for young spokespeople, young State Department people who are out doing the work that Mark, who's very experienced, but people who are doing that job. And the first thing that the State Department spokesperson said is, tell the truth. Do not lie. She said, you may not, as I said earlier, you may not be able to say everything you know, but you have to start by telling the truth. Now, what I would say is, any kind of job that you have, if you're a salesman, and you're selling refrigerators, you can't sell a bad product. You can't lie about what the product you're selling is. You have to be able to sleep at night, okay? And if you're a journalist and they are telling you, your boss is saying, I don't care what is accurate, this is what you were right, I would have a serious problem with that. And I would urge, if you're in that position, I would urge you, within reason, to quit. Find another employer. I can't believe that that is what's happening across the board. And so whatever your job is, you need to do it to the best of your ability. And hopefully the product that you're producing or selling is something that you can feel proud of. If it's not, then I think, this may be idealistic, but I think you've got to find another line of work or find another employer. I would say, don't give in. If people hold the line, it'll make a difference. That's my feeling on it. Thank you.
We'll take a question from the online audience related to trends. The question, maybe I'll ask Deborah to address it as a journalist who's practiced in various locations. Digital technologies and tools have empowered civic journalism. With a smartphone and access to the internet, almost anyone can be a journalist. How do you think this trend has affected the traditional journalism? How, according to your observation, is the journalism industry responding to this trend?
I would echo the earlier comments about how information now moves extremely fast, and that in some part is due to the fact that every citizen now has access to ways of broadcasting the information at their fingertips, and so the inputs of information is now vastly greater than it was before, and the speed at which information travels is now extremely fast. We have tried to incorporate these technologies into our reporting in a way that, where we feel that speed and accuracy is not compromised for the sake of speed. And we also have, there are policies that we've instituted in order to check the veracity of some of these high speed, I'll just say like a Twitter account or a Facebook account, which is that you can't just take an account with a certain name on it and assume that it is that person. And so, we always try to call or get in touch with the person, call or email or somehow otherwise verify the veracity of that account before we cite anything from it. So, we've been able to vet certain Twitter accounts, Facebook accounts in order to have that aid our reporting. So I'd say that has been helpful to our reporting. We've also used some of the technologies to augment our own reporting and distribution of our news. So like when the Sunflower Movement broke out in March and April, we had basically a live tweeting from what was happening the night that they stormed the cabinet compound, and things got quite nasty. If you guys remember, there were like bloody protesters, and we were actually the first, I believe, the first media organization in Taiwan to report the fact that the police had moved in on the protesters and were starting to use batons to try to evict them. And that was all done in real time. So anyone with a Bloomberg terminal at that time could have seen our headlines cross, and I believe our reporter on the scene, Tim Copeland, was also live tweeting. So it's been a help, but you have to know how to check the sources.
Mr. Guo, I wonder if there's any reaction to what's happening in Taiwan?
I would like to respond to the previous question, which means that is anyone can be a civil journalism. I am slightly not comfortable with that idea because you are not trained as a journalist, and you are not sure 100% of what's happening in front of you. Although you are in front of the story, but maybe you don't have a full grasp of what's happening. And the information you provide, either is a picture or video or your account, would have to be checked and double checked. So anyone sending us a news lead, we take that as a news lead. We will not take that straight away to our website or in our story. I think that's the minimum we are responsible for our viewers should do.
I think one important trend that you're seeing with citizen journalism is that something that we call the long tail, which is that, if you're thinking about on the y-axis, it's influence, the number of people that you reach and the amount that they trust or believe in you. At this high level, the head of the dog, you have the major news organizations. That's who has a following, has website traffic, and citizen journalists are more at the tail. Their influence is much lower. They become amplified when the United Daily News or Bloomberg picks up on that reporting. I'm delighted to report that they almost never pick up on that reporting without verification, without doing the kinds of things to verify who really is behind this Twitter account, what actually does this video involve, so that we are, the real impact of citizen journalism is when it gets that uptake, and that uptake is relying, at least now, on a lot of verification, and that's a good thing. It's a very good thing. I would say there are also some interesting developments trying to use the power of the crowd to debunk falsehoods by so-called citizen journalists. So there's a really interesting group called Storyful. The founder's name is Mark Little. It's actually just been bought by News Corp. And Storyful tries to take citizen journalism reports from social media and put them out to the crowd, to other citizens, and have them verified that way. And it's a really interesting practice. They do everything from having people translate videos that are in a different language to go back and try and trace an image to make sure that it's current. So, for instance, there were some things that on social media that were purportedly about a U.S. invasion in Syria that turned out to be actually images and video from the U.S. invasion in Iraq a decade ago. And so efforts like Storyful that try to use citizens to help verify information are a wonderful progress. I'm very optimistic about them.
That's great.
So, one of the tools of traditional journalism is shorthand, and I'm just particularly for the journalists, I'm wondering how important you consider it now that a student journalist would know shorthand, or how the rate of shorthand. Take dictation, sorry, that's a British term. In the UK, our standard is 100 words per minute. I don't know about the US, but it seems to be a requirement across the board within the UK still that a new journalist has 100 words per minute shorthand.
I never formally learned what shorthand should be, but my shorthand is something only myself can recognize, so not anyone else.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a requirement at any of the foreign organizations anymore, at least here. We always travel with a tape recorder because that's got to be the most reliable way. And yes, of course, it takes a long time. When you get back to the office, you have an hour-long interview with somebody tape recorded. It takes a while to go through and transcribe it, but that is the best way to protect both yourself, your organization, and your source.
I would just add to that there's some really interesting research coming out about how we process digital communication that is showing that stenography, or taking shorthand or taking verbatim notes on a computer, actually impedes comprehension. So taking notes, having a recording so that you have the verbatim statement so you can quote it, but then using your notes as a way for you to take the points and make them more concise actually improves your understanding. You get it right more often if you are translating the points into something that you are digesting on the fly, as opposed to when you're just taking notes straight out. So in fact, in my classes now, one of the exercises my students have to do is to take notes on my lecture and turn the notes in to show me that they've done that, rather than just taking verbatim notes, that they've translated in their minds what they think they understand from what I've said, and comprehension we're starting to see is improved by doing that. So I would say actually there may be a case for shorthand working against you, but always have that recording device. Pretend like it's broken, take good notes, but have that recording device so you can go back and get the verbatim quote.
In the third row, please.
Hi, is this working? In terms of speed, actually, there was this debate about, having accurate news. But I actually come from Istanbul, a city of 15 million, and I witnessed the Gezi protests. So, in which a dozen people died in 3 major cities, right? 12. And because there was so little coverage, and because the city was so large, and because the journalists weren't well equipped and they weren't able to fight and actually record through all the gas that was thrown at the protesters, we actually needed all these citizen journalists. And after some point, after the death of Turkish journalism, actually, I'd like to say that it was a death, the only credible 3 sources were Mashable, BuzzFeed, and Vice News. Like, these were like quote-unquote amateur news networks. And now the Turkish journalists, who are actually honest working people, are trying to establish their credibility, but they weren't able to keep up with the speed. And sometimes it's physically impossible to actually keep up with the speed, and they have to rely on these Twitter feeds. Like on my Twitter at night, I'd have 50 tweets per second. And at some point, you can't really follow everything. You read all these pictures, you have all this media, you're overflown with this, and at that point, with so much hatred and so much violence, you get emotionally detached with the news. So how do journalists actually make worthwhile news which people care about? Because the flow of information makes the audience extremely detached.
Wow, actually that's about 3 or 4 questions wrapped into one, all of them exceptionally important. So I'm not familiar with the case in Istanbul in particular, but there's a lot of corollaries to the Arab Spring. And one case that I'd like to point out in particular is NPR in the States and their approach to the Arab Spring. They had at that time a staff member named Andy Carvin. And, Andy was doing battle with a lot of ethicists during the Arab Spring because they were saying, wait a minute, you're retweeting these reports, you're doing nothing to verify, you don't know what's happening, and what are you doing? And what he was saying was, look, like it or not, this is information that's in the public sphere, and I'm sharing it. And I'm sharing it with tags that say rumor or report or verified, but I am putting it out there. Being an ethicist, Andy Carvin was one of the people that I wanted to study during the Arab Spring, and so I tried to follow his Twitter feed pretty consistently. I experienced exactly what you have described. That at some point the feed is moving so fast, your eyes almost can't follow it on TweetDeck anymore, and you go, I can't do it, I give up. So I think it is important. I think there is a role for people like Andy to be sharing the information that's out there in the public sphere, very importantly tagged, so that we note that this is a rumor or that this is verified. But I also think there's a role for journalists to take that stream and, just like we do in reporting on a 1-hour press conference, trying to determine what is the most important information and translate that to an audience. Okay, we take highly specialized information about science and we make it more generalized for an audience to be able to understand. We're interpreters, and we don't just interpret. We're not stenographers. We don't just interpret and put the speech out there verbatim. We try to let an audience know what's important. So tools like Storify, for instance, are you familiar with Storify? It's a social platform where you can take tweets and Facebook posts and Instagram pictures, and you can build them into a story and include text in between as transition. Those are tools that can help us overcome that kind of shock and awe of the tremendous information stream that's out there. And so journalists can use those tools to help the audience through that and help them find meaning in these overwhelming events.
Again, I'm finding myself in a difficult position because I don't agree 100% of what your question and what Catherine had just said, meaning that if you are within this movement, you are seeing your people is in danger, you want to call for more people to support you, then do it. Do it whatever ways of doing. You can exaggerate the things, you can use all kinds of social media as much as possible. But when you are reporting, that's a different thing. Meaning you have to bring out the most objective facts to your audience. That means there shouldn't be any exaggeration or propaganda element in here. During the Sunflower Movement, I keep reminding my reporters that you are reporters, you are not part of the movement. I think that is a very important distinction you have to make. Otherwise, you quit your job and join the movement. That's that simple. But sometimes I understand it's very difficult for those 20-something or 30-something people to do. Especially a lot of people demonstrating are their fellow classmates. And it's very hard to relate, not to relate their feeling with your own feeling. So that's one of the difficulty I'm finding in all the demonstrations. Now it's happening in Hong Kong, Occupy Central, that a big TV company, TVB, there's a lot of reporters saying that the boss shouldn't deal with things in that attitude. So I'm not quite sure the exact detail of the things, but I'm finding that a lot of young people, when they are working as a journalist, and especially they are involved with that kind of movement, they are constantly facing that kind of moral dilemma.
Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge an online questioner that we won't go back, but I wanted to acknowledge that we did address the question. The question was more and more journalists in Taiwan share their comments on social media. Some of them are fair, some are not. And the question goes on to talk about the student movement. So I think we've addressed that one. Sir.
First of all, I would like to agree with Mr. Kuo on his previous comments regarding journalism, as in, like, in order to have a certain quality, you do have to have some sort of a training. And I have to be honest, is that my group, most of us do not have that kind of a training. And so for me, I view this as a long-term process in order for us to actually become something that's more highly credible. And at the same time, during the Sunflower Movement, when some of our members were in there, while I was not a part of the movement or inside the movement, I was at home. However, I do know from my medical school education that if you do want to view an experiment or observe something, you have to be like at least a little sort of detached in some ways. And so what I did was it was only about like 1 or 2 weeks when we started it, and some of them just went in without my consent. And so what I did was I made a short video clip and I told them like all the stuff that they shouldn't be doing. If they really want to report, they couldn't be calling on people or like saying like, oh, why are you pushing me and all that stuff, because like you're trying to be just an observer, because your job is there to observe. What I do have a question though is regarding reporting, because we're not from a journalism background. So what we are curious about is if we do interview people like in a very informal way, how credible is that in terms of a source? That's my question. And then the other question, which is for the U.S. government, I understand the limitations of your answers. How much percentage of the independent news does the U.S. government read in terms of what Taiwan has? And how do you verify whether the source is credible or not? That's the second question. Thank you.
So before you give back the microphone, actually, could I ask for just a little bit more detail, what do you mean by informally interviewing? And maybe you could just give me an example so I'm sure I understand, because to me, informal means sort of, hey, you, but I think for you, it might mean something different.
All right. What we did was initially we were trying to figure out certain issues in central or southern Taiwan. And so what one of my members initially did was he approached a person and said like he was doing stuff for an independent press. And for more than 3 people, after listening to his initial statement, decided to shirk away from the whatever kind of interview because they're just kind of skirting away. And when I went down to the south, what we did was I pretended that I was just a tourist, and this other guy pretended to be the serious guy, and we sort of got some quotes out of a shop owner, but like we were trying to do it in a, not like in a very sinister way, but rather we were doing it as in like, we're not sure about this issue, what is happening in southern Taiwan regarding that issue, and so could you fill us in on that?
Okay, great, thank you. That's good, because that was not the way that I understood your question. So I would say it is very fraught to pretend that you are something other than who you are when you are a journalist. You know, there are times with very serious investigations, things that you could not otherwise crack, that sometimes you have to pretend to be something other than you are. There's a case, a very famous case in the United States with a paper in Chicago, which is a famously corrupt city in the United States. They were trying to crack open an investigation about payoffs to local government officials, and they just could not get through source after source after source. So they ended up creating a bar, a tavern, called the Mirage, actually, because that's what it was. But they built a bar, and they were able to demonstrate payoffs to building inspectors, licensing regulators, mayoral staff, but there was no other way for them to tell that story. So that's the primary question. Is there any other way to get the story other than pretending to be someone else? And in the case that you describe, I suspect you may have had to talk to 30 people instead of 3, but you probably could have gotten there without pretending to be something other than you are. So it's the importance of the information and no other means to get it. That's what you need to think about before you assume a false identity. And I'm curious to hear Joe answer how much the U.S. government pays attention to U.S. news and media.
Let me I just ask you to repeat your second question. I think I got it, but I'd like you to repeat it for me if you would.
Okay, regarding how the United States looks at news in Taiwan, like how much percentage of independent press and mainstream press do you guys look into, and how do you verify the source? Because like, as you can see, we have a whole bunch of other independent press just sprung out right after the Sunflower Movement, if I remember correctly. And so I'm not exactly sure how you guys view that.
Okay. We are, the U.S. American Institute in Taiwan is very, very interested in the Taiwan media. And so every day we read the newspapers, Chinese language and English language papers. We look at what's online. We monitor what's on television. We pay attention to the radio. We look at not just straight news stories, but we also look at commentary. We're interested in all of this for a number of reasons. One is we want to send it back to Washington to help them get a better understanding of what's going on in Taiwan. It's also especially useful for us here at the American Institute in Taiwan for us to understand what's going on in Taiwan. That's why we don't just read 1 or 2 papers. Same thing when we talk to people. You know, at AIT, we go out and we talk to a whole wide range of groups and people in Taiwan so we can better understand what's going on in Taiwan. So we are quite interested. We're also interested to know, what is Taiwan? What are you saying about AIT? I mean, we have this, what I think is a very good program this afternoon. Tomorrow, we'll go look and see what kind of coverage we got. This will help us understand how are we doing our job well? How can we do our job better? Are we getting our messages out? Okay, so we don't, you know, if we see an editorial that says, criticizes what the U.S. is doing around the world, we will not go to the editor and say, hey, you know, why did you write that? We don't do that, but it's useful for us to report back to Washington what is being said. If we see an area where there's a great misunderstanding of our policies, then we know we need to do better. Maybe we need more programs. We need to do a better job of explaining that. But I can tell you this is not unique to Taiwan. Every place where we are around the world, we do the same things. We monitor the media. Now, we can't look at every blog, and everything out there. We don't have our staff. We don't have enough staff to do that. But we look at, the major media, online, print, that's TV. We're constantly monitoring it. So that's basically what we're doing. We're very, very interested. Okay, thank you.
If I could just, if I could just make one more point, and that is that you mentioned that you're independent and that you're not trained. And I would say you have a responsibility to get trained. And the great part about our digital information landscape is that there are so many places for you to find that. Mark mentioned that I do some work with the Poynter Institute. They have an entire online set of courses. It's called NewsU, and they have modules on ethics, on interviewing, on when to go on and off the record. I mean, whole courses that have wonderful set of journalists and educators. So, for citizen journalists who want to do this well, or for upstart young news organizations, there isn't a yes and a no. I've been to journalism school or I haven't, or I work in an organization that has standards or I don't. There are things that you can do to get schooled, and I would encourage you to follow up on them.
What I would like to do is, because Mark is our spokesperson, and he's the person every day. He's the one working on the media issues. I'd like to ask him if he has anything to add to that. Do you, Mark?
I do. I appreciate the opportunity. As you were asking the question, I wrote down 3 quick thoughts, and I guess they're pieces of evidence to offer to you as evidence that we take Taiwan media very seriously. I would point out that Dr. Culver is here working on media issues. I mentioned in the introduction, we get 1 opportunity per year to do this. We may focus on other policy issues sometimes, but this year we focused on media, and we've spent a very solid week doing all kinds of work on this media issue. I would point out as well that the colleagues you see moving around the room are part of our team, and I've asked them to keep on their computers running at least 4 major Taiwan media outlets throughout the workday. As long as they're sitting at their desks, I would like them to be monitoring the media, because we have to understand what's being said here, whether or not it directly involves AIT, and we have to decide if we need to react. So I think maybe that evinces how seriously we take the local media here. Last point I would make is that one of our colleagues sitting here often comes to me and says we need to react to this piece of information that is about AIT. In those cases, we don't fool around for 12 hours. If we agree, and again with Joe's permission and the director's permission and discussion, the director being our boss, I will often wind up in front of the AIT doing what we call a stand-up interview, and we'll put the word out and the TV crews will come and we'll react to a piece of information. That's again, I think evidence of how seriously we take getting the word out, doing some messaging, being a little bit efficient. That's not an instantaneous 140-word tweet, but maybe within 30 minutes or an hour, I can be in front of the office and do a stand-up interview. So we take the media very seriously here as part of our work on the U.S.-Taiwan relationship. Thank you. I think a colleague in the back has been...
Thank you. My name is Adam, and I'm from Foreign Student Taiwan Group. My question I would ask is, we are in digital age, right? And we all know that using Facebook for advertise and promote product, inform and company is advantageous. But I just wonder what exactly advantages is, and can you give me some example advantages with using Facebook for advertise? Yeah, advertise
For
the,
advertising specifically?
yeah, advertise the product of company,
Of news media companies or just companies overall?
just company overall.
Okay.
I will ask for Miss Deborah. Yeah.
I think I could probably speak about why Bloomberg maintains a social media presence. But I'm not really sure why, Coca-Cola or any other type of company would. For us, it is a way not only to get our stories out, obviously we want as great of an audience as possible to highlight our quality, but we also enjoy the interaction with readers. So sometimes you have these groups, sometimes on LinkedIn or on Facebook, and you get a bit of interaction with the readers, and you get their take on your stories, maybe where there was confusion, what parts of it were not clear, and then we can then go and probably make the story read better and more closely, like the long-term community aspect of it, especially in circles like finance. It tends to be a community of people who are on top of the news, and for individual reporters, it's a way for them to keep sources. So, I just had this big long report, and let me know what you think. It's a way to build community from our perspective.
That's the perspective of why you would advertise in a newspaper versus a magazine versus on television versus on social media. Is all about, just like I mentioned with the New York Times Innovation Report, what the audience expects from that platform and how well the message resonates. So, for instance, video or television is very, very good at triggering emotion, and emotion is tied to memory. So if you've ever watched a commercial that really makes you feel very warm, it's about a children's product, or they're using kids to sell you a pair of Gap jeans, it's because that video triggers emotion, and emotion triggers memory. And my esteemed colleague in the back spent years studying this, so he can speak to it as well. With advertising specifically on social platforms, the benefit there is not as much emotion, but more engagement. And we try to move people up what's called the ladder of engagement. So at the very low level of engagement would be having something show up in your Facebook feed. You move up a little bit if you hit like, and then the big grand glory is if you share it. And in the act of sharing, we are again really triggering that engagement and that memory of the product, and also because it is a social medium, if I share the Gap ad on my or a Gap promotion on my Facebook, I am the intermediary between Gap and my friends. So if Joe is a friend of mine on Facebook, we should make that happen. If Joe is a friend of mine on Facebook, he sees that I have shared this Gap promotion, he's more likely to engage with it because he's engaged with me, because we're friends, we respect and like each other. So the reason that brands would advertise on social media is that engagement, and then that second step of influence, that you're using people, using them, I mean that verb, you're using people to increase the power of your message. And every medium has different strengths. So a newspaper has different strengths from television, for instance. Radio is very good at helping us visualize a scene, which is tied to memory. Magazines are very good at high-end production, and people see advertising as experiential. It's part of, you do surveys of people, why do you subscribe to a magazine? They will say part of the reason is advertising. They actually want that ad in that magazine. You don't get that with a newspaper. The ads aren't nearly as valuable in a newspaper. So when you're talking about advertising on social media, it's about engagement and influence. Those are really the two big factors.
One point. I was in Hong Kong in 2010 at our consulate. We have a consulate general there, and we started up a Facebook account. And my spokesperson was not Mark, but someone in his role. said, let's put an advertisement. We'll do some advertising on Facebook, maybe US $50 to try, because we were interested in youth outreach. We wanted to get more young people in Hong Kong interested in our Facebook account. And to me, it seemed like a strange idea. I mean, people should just want to come and see us, but he explained to me it doesn't work that way. So we did. We spent, say, $50. We did some ads, and I was amazed. We got thousands of people, came to us and, were following us on Facebook. And so I saw, even the U.S. government, and you don't think of us perhaps as so tech savvy or high tech, but we were learning about this. We wanted to get a young audience. We did the ads, and we don't do that all the time, but very occasionally, if there's something special we want to promote, this is a way to reach out. And so you have to know how to get to your audience. So for me, that was kind of a new trick for an old dog, was how to get this, and so it worked very well. So you have to decide, where is your audience, how can you get them, and what is the price? Is that worth it? And so for us back in 2010, it made sense and was successful. Thank you.
All right, we'll maybe go to the side here. While the microphone's moving, I'd like to emphasize that we will take questions in Chinese. Our colleagues can do it in reverse and bring the question to our panelists.
Okay, I've actually got two questions. First one, easier one maybe, about infotainment. Okay, so some people are saying that the destiny, the human society, is that we're all going to reach this state of infotainment, where all news will be entertainment news. And well, right now, especially in Taiwan, we see this kind of, where's the line between news and this infotainment stuff, especially with things like Apple News and other magazine newspapers like this. So the question is, where is that line? And related to that also is the audience. It seems the audience desires this kind of news rather than the actual boring news that is, actual news. The second question be related to what you were saying about, there are facts in the world, right? Okay, so, yes. Okay, so I'm a journalism student. I graduated from journalism school, and one of the things we'll talk about is that it's impossible to be 100% objective. And not just even as much as you want to be objective, it's hard for you to be objective. But what's even worse is that everybody else in the world, governments, institutions, they have their agenda. Yes, okay, they're honest, but they're honest with their agenda. And so how do we get this fact-based world in the reality of so many different kind of perspectives? All right, that's my question. Thank you.
I'll try to talk a little bit about infotainment. There's a huge demand for infotainment, and actually the subject or the person appear on the infotainment section is not really you are a singer or you are an actor. It's not like that. Nowadays, we are creating a new category. It's called celebrity. Everyone who is a celebrity, whether you are a baseball player or even a politician, if you are considered a celebrity, you're a model, that's of course. That segment, I think, had attract a lot of attention. I think, for instance, in London, Daily Mail is doing that especially. But in Taiwan, we are seeing that before the regular news, there's a half-hour entertainment news. And in the newspaper, the entertainment section is usually the thickest one, because all the advertisers, they want to put their ad in there, because they know people will take that section first. Is that a good thing or bad thing? I'm not sure. But at this moment, that is really the hand that relayed the golden egg, and that is where the revenue is coming from the media perspective.
I absolutely agree that there's a lot of revenue to be had by chasing celebrity and deal with entertainment issues. I also think we do not exist by broccoli alone. I like a good ice cream sundae. I do. For some people, the ice cream sundae is Kim Kardashian. Not me. Can't stand the Kardashians, but one of the things ethicists think about is how we flourish as human beings. We don't flourish by news alone. Somewhere one of my old journalism school professors is going, oh God, where is she going? Where is she going with this? Here's where I go. My husband loves sports. He loves the Green Bay Packers maybe more than me. It's part of his soul, and it's part of what helps him flourish as a human being. God forbid I should sit for 3 hours on Sunday and try to watch a game with him. It's not a pleasant experience. But he flourishes as a human being. Yet he knows that the Packers are not life in full. He knows that he participates in his community. He cares about how his children are educated. He follows politics. He understands business. He worries about corruption. He consumes news. He has a balanced diet. He's got ice cream Sunday, but he also eats protein and his dairy and his vegetables. And anybody who callously thinks that we have this postmodern conception, we're going all entirely to infotainment, I would say, look at some of the authoritarian regimes in this world and look at how bravely people are fighting for the freedom that, Kim Kardashian can take for granted. Nobody ever laid down in front of a tank because they wanted to watch the Green Bay Packers. They laid down because they wanted to have a say in their government. I mean, I'm being a little off the cuff with Kardashian, but I'm tremendously moved by people who fight for their freedom. And I think that's why journalists have this tremendous responsibility. These are hard-won rights. In the United States, we can all too often take them for granted, but lives were lost, and in the Civil War, a nation divided, the number of people we lost to defend that liberty, it's monumental. So no, I don't think that as humans we will ever give way to a purely infotainment world. I think we will always have ice cream sundaes, but I think for people to be free, they need that free press, and they will fight for it.
I'll note that I had the pleasure of traveling to Kaohsiung with Dr. Culver yesterday, and our translator had prepared for things like media ethics and social media. She hadn't prepared to translate Green Bay Packers. An American football team. I'm going to take the liberty of pitching a question to... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. Thank you. My second question was, well, you mentioned before about the fact-based world. So, I mean, anybody can answer.
I think step one is to believe that there are facts, right? I mean, I think even that basic, what we see as a very basic fact, is being questioned constantly, right? Everybody thinks that whatever organization is it's always just speaking for its own interest, and I think that is fundamentally wrong. I think it's important to subject what you hear to critical thinking, just a critical view. Like, this person is saying X, well, what makes that believable? Or is there somebody who perhaps is an even better source for this type of information? Maybe that person shouldn't be speaking on this topic. So, I don't know, I think that's step one. The other thing is, I totally agree that it's impossible to be completely objective in every report. And I don't think that is typically our goal. I have a newsroom of 10 journalists, and we all sit on different parts of the political spectrum. And I don't think, no one ever believes that whatever they write is going to reflect their own spin or their own take on things. But it's important to be fair. If you're reading a news story and it does not say anything about what the argument against this is, then you should maybe question that, right? What is the alternative argument? Every news story should present as many, and there aren't always just 2 sides to a story. Sometimes there's 3 sides, 4 sides. So it's a matter of to be a really good journalist, you have to know what are all the issues involved, what are the different viewpoints. We have the last part of our stories is often what we call the to be sure, right? You spent 3/4 of the story already making a case like this is definitely happening. Every expert in the world says this is definitely happening. To be sure, though, somebody will always have a different view, and I think it's important to present that different view.
Sure, we'll take another one here, please.
So I come from, I'm from the UK, but I'm specifically from Scotland, and I was a journalist in Scotland, and as you know, we had an independence referendum about a month ago, and a lot of my friends on Facebook and a lot of my friends on Twitter are journalists themselves, and I know you guys say you have to remain unbiased and can't put across your opinion, but in such a momentous decision, do you think journalists should be influencing? I mean, I personally believe that some might have been unknowingly biased, perhaps, or even me myself. I've been studying it in my thesis, but it's very hard when it comes to like the future of a nation.
You're my second Scot of the week, and I will say you are much more thoughtful than the first. So you raised a really good point. Where I come from, in Wisconsin, we had 3 years ago an incredibly tumultuous time, a very strongly ideological governor and legislature moved far more quickly than the rest of the population was ready for on some, I won't get into the details, but on some legislation. It led to widespread protests. I think it challenged a lot of journalists that whether we have a private life, whether we're allowed to private opinions, whether I can say on Facebook whether I agree or disagree with Governor Walker. And the question at the end of the day is, are you seeking to be a fair journalist, or are you seeking to be an advocate? And there are advocates who work for news organizations, columnists, editorial writers, people who have that voice. And if you are so passionate about your cause, you should become one. You should become an advocate. But if your goal is to be representing public debate, if your goal is to be covering the issues of the day, you ought not express opinions. However, you should not fall victim to this mythology that we actually can be objective. The most important part about reporting fairly is acknowledging your own bias. It is very important for me to say that I really did not believe in what Governor Walker was doing because I thought it was too radical for the state of Wisconsin. The rest of the population was not with him. We weren't ready for where he was going. I need to acknowledge that to myself so that as I report, I can make sure I'm not allowing that to seep into my coverage. I'm not only seeking out the sources who are agreeing with what I'm saying. You have to be very honest in your evaluation of how you feel about Scottish independence or remaining as part of the UK so that you can take overt steps to counter that bias. But at the end of the day, it really is a question about what you want to be. Do you want to be a news reporter or do you want to be an advocate? And that's your choice. You get to flourish as a human being either way.
I think,
不好意思，我只能说中文哦。就是我会等大家发言完我再来说，是因为说刚好等到说讲到评论这一区块哦。因为刚才就是综合大家以上所说的哦，因为曾经就是因为我比较关心国家治理跟人民解决问题这一区块，好，那是因为说我到新北市议会去监督，才发现政治人物他们的新闻跟实际上是两回事，完全不同的。 就有媒体所看到都是假的，大部分都是假的。那你这样子对于一个权势者，这个官员的咨询也好，或者这一个民意代表，这身负重任要来做一些资源分配，是很大很严重的事情。所以在美国之前有政府关门的事情，好，那再加上说我在脸书上面我也跑到奥巴马的脸书上去发表意见，那是因为说我觉得蓝的跟绿的讲的都不是人民的心声，那我只能用中文的发表意见之后赶快贴过去。那我想一想，奥巴马看得到吗？哦，那如果看得到的话，真的还是个福音。所以刚才说这个马先生他所说的发言人他所说的，就是说他会看这些所谓的主流媒体，好，或是评论下来的意见是人民的意见嘛？我想这就是独立媒体，它可能不是公民记者，它是独立，但是独立的前提是他可能自己要去修。就好比说我要花很多时间去看预算书，那我可能还要去看一下税法，去了解这些民意代表他们所做的事情。啊，那到底你有没有真的做你的事情？发现是都没有。那或许这一部分来讲，就是民主以来最大的缺陷。那我不知道美国是不是这样，那我也不知道美国的新闻是不是说能够说借由新闻的揭露里面去解决人民的问题，那去提升到国家的效能。因为我刚才听到说这位教授说美国有贪污的政府，是吓一跳。因为美国在我的求学经验就是一个民主开放。法治最主要是诚实，因为华盛顿就是叫我诚实，所以我一直很诚实。但是诚实的代价是很惨痛的，说谎的代价是有糖吃的，所以这一个整个社会教育上真的出了问题。还有就是说，我想请教一下，就是说美国来讲对台湾名嘴这个乱象哦，在美国有没有这个情况？因为我这样长期花几年观察下来，台湾的媒体是一体作业的。我早上从平面媒体出来，啊，各大报有各大报的立场。然后轰炸人民，轰炸完电视再轰炸，轰炸晚上再轰炸。哦，那因为我发现，因为我自己生病了，为什么？我看这些新闻看到生病，那我最近在这礼拜我都不看，我挑标题看，就那一两条。那联合报还好是说，因为我常常就是边看边观察边骂，那联合报是稍微真的有进步。哦，那不像可能苹果日报比较一些造成一些什么色情太性开放，有的很糟糕。那可能中国时报就跟自由时报对干，那这样为了中国跟台湾的问题啊，那其实有时候对于阅听者，你跳快自己独立记者身份来看，啊，怎么会这样子弄？好，这个都是我额外的了